In the last section, we added in another reducer whose purpose was to record whether or not a particular row was selected or not. By default, that reducer will always return null, so we don't really have any selection logic right now, which means we need to figure out how to update the currently selected ID from the list item. So in other words, when a user taps on a list item, how do I make sure to update my selected library ID piece of state? So that's what we're going to try to figure out here. At this point in time, we have not really made use of any actions inside this component just yet, so we're going to have to remember from our very brief walkthrough on Redux exactly how we update any piece of state inside our application. So I'm going to pull up a diagram really quick. And here we go. Okay, so if you recall, we had introduced the concept of actions in addition to our reducers much previously. So forget these two squares over to the left-hand side. Let's just focus on the right-hand side. An action is a plain JavaScript object that has a type property. This type property can be thought of as like a command or a direction, like an instruction, to be passed off to the reducer. So in our case, we might create an action of type, I don't know, maybe like select library or something like that, and pass along the ID of the library to be selected. Then inside of our selection reducer, we should record that very particular ID, right? We should like say, okay, this is now the ID that is selected. But we're missing a little bit of a piece of the puzzle there. We are inside of a component, so how exactly do we create or dispatch an action from inside of a component? Well, I'm going to throw another piece of Redux terminology at you now. Obviously, it is the extra square on this diagram here. We're going to create what is called an action creator. So inside of the previous example with Redux we created an action and called store.dispatch to send off that action to all of our reducers. Inside of a React Redux application, that process is just a little bit different. So inside of a React application, we make what is called an action creator, and then we call the action creator. The purpose of the action creator is to just, exactly as the name suggests, create an action. That's it. It creates an action. So again, in the kind of theme of putting plain text definitions to all these things, the purpose, let me give a plain text definition action creator. An action creator is a JavaScript function that returns an action. That's it. Okay, so I'm going to stop lecturing now because I know sometimes I go overboard. Let's get some practice with creating an action creator. So back inside my project directory, I'm going to make a new folder inside of my source directory called actions. And then inside of actions, I'm going to make another file called index.js. So inside of this file is where I will locate all of the different action creators for my project. In this case, I only expect to have one action creator because the only action that we have is the ability to change the currently selected library. So I expect to just have one single action creator inside this file for right now. Remember that an action creator is a JavaScript function. So I'm going to create a function and immediately export it. So I'm going to say export const select library, and that is going to be a function like so. Then inside of here, I will return my action. So I'm going to return a plain JavaScript object with property type of select library. Okay, so I know that I moved very quickly right there, but let's like take a step back and look at what we just did. The thing I want you to focus most on is the very internal statement or expression inside of this entire file right here. I have an object with a type property. We've gone over this several times now. An object with a type property is an action, and an action is how we cause our reducers to update the data that they produce. The action is wrapped by a function which we refer to as an action creator. So this function right here is what we call an action creator. Whenever we call this action creator, the returned action will be automatically dispatched to us for us and sent off to all the different reducers. Okay. So the last thing we have to do with this action right here is figure out, well, we are selecting a library, but we need to make sure that we instruct the reducer exactly which library we are trying to select. So I'm going to suggest that whenever we call this action creator right here, we should pass in the ID of the library that we want to select. So I'm going to add an argument to this, library ID, and then I will attach a payload to the action, library ID. So now whenever I call this action creator, I must provide a library ID, like the library that I want to select, and that will be attached to the action as the payload. Okay, so this looks good. It's a good first pass on this action and action creator. I still feel like we went over this whole topic of action creators very quickly. So let's continue in the next section, figure out how we use an action creator, and then do a quick review on the entire topic.